Chamber is sitting today to deliver its judgment in the case of Pavle Strugar. For the purposes of this hearing, emphasising that this is a summary only, and that the only authoritative account of the trial chamber's findings and of its reasons for those findings is to be found in the written judgment, copies of which will be made available to the parties and to the public at the conclusion of this hearing. Before turning to the merits, the Chamber wishes to thank the translators and interpreters, the Court Management Section and the Victim and Witnesses Section, as well as Counsel and the Chamber's Legal Support Team for having facilitated the conduct of the trial. The accused, Pavle Strugar, is a retired Lieutenant General of the then Yugoslav Peoples Army, JNA. He is charged in the indictment with crimes allegedly committed on 6 December 1991 in the course of a military campaign of the JNA in the area of Dubrovnik in Croatia in October, November and December 1991. It is alleged that in the course of unlawful artillery shelling by the JNA on the old historic town of Dubrovnik on 6 December 1991, 2 people were killed, 2 were seriously wounded, and many buildings of historic and cultural significance in the old town were damaged. These allegations support the 6 charges in the indictment of violation of the laws or customs of war under Article 3 of the Statute of the Tribunal, namely murder, cruel treatment, attacks on civilians, devastation not justified by military necessity, attacks on civilian objects, and destruction of institutions dedicated to inter alia religion and the arts and sciences. It is alleged that the accused is guilty of each of these 6 counts on 2 distinct bases. First, pursuant to Article 7.1 of the statute, that he personally ordered the shelling of the old town and that he personally aided and abetted the shelling. Secondly, as a superior responsible for the criminal conduct of the forces under his command, pursuant to Article 7.3 of the statute, the accused's liability is alleged to arise out of the position he then held as commander of the 2nd Operational Group, 2OG. In September 1991, hostilities between the JNA and Croatian forces began in the south coastal area of Croatia. A blockade of Dubrovnik was established from 1 October 1991. It continued into 1992. The JNA forces, under the accused's command, launched combat operations to advance closer on the city of Dubrovnik, in particular from 23 to 26 October 1991 and from 9 to 13 November 1991. Both times, the wider city of Dubrovnik in general and its historic old town in particular were shelled. By 13 November 1991, the JNA effectively held all the territory around the wider city of Dubrovnik, except for Mount Serge, the dominant topographical feature of Dubrovnik immediately above the old town, where there is a fortress from Napoleonic times. In early December 1991, negotiations were held in an attempt to resolve the problem of the blockade of Dubrovnik. Dubrovnik was but one of several issues arising out of the conflict in the then SFRY, with which the highest Croatian and Serbian levels were occupied at the time. A Croatian ministerial delegation, led by Minister Rudolph, and the JNA, represented by Admiral Jokic, met in Savtat on 5 December 1991. They were to continue on 6 December 1991. The events directly relevant to 6 December 1991 are the subject of a great deal of evidence. Much of it is inconsistent or conflicting. It has been necessary for the Chamber to determine where the truth lies. Our reasons are set out in detail in the written judgment. The summary of material events that follows reflects our findings as to what, in truth, did occur. Well before sunrise, at about 0550 hours on the morning of 6 December 1991, residents of the old town of Dubrovnik awoke to the sound of explosions. An artillery attack had commenced. While initially the firing was mainly concentrated on the area around Serge, some shelling occurred on residential areas of Dubrovnik, including the old town and the port of the old town, virtually from the outset of the attack. However, the focus of the attack came to shift from Serge to the wider city of Dubrovnik, including the old town. The most intense shelling occurred in the morning, between 0900-0930 and about 1100 hours. At about 11:15 hours, a considerable drop in the frequency of the shelling occurred. This lull was not long-lived, however, and shelling picked up again to continue, though more sporadically. Shelling decreased noticeably a little after 1500 hours and had substantially ceased by a little after 1630 hours. The shelling of Dubrovnik, including the old town, had continued for over 10.5 hours on 6 December 1991. On 6 December 1991, the JNA attempted to capture Serge. The attempt commenced between 0500 and 0600 hours on 6 December under cover of darkness. It was undertaken by two small infantry units of the 3rd Battalion 472nd Brigade of the JNA. Each had close tank support. Less than 40 soldiers made the attack. Even so, the defending Croatian forces on Serge were outnumbered. The JNA infantry and artillery actions that day were overseen and coordinated by the commander of the 3rd Battalion 472nd Brigade, Captain Kovacevic, who was located at his observation post on Zarkovica, a small plateau about 2 kilometres to the southeast of the old town, with clear views to the northwest of Dubrovnik, especially the Old Town and Surge. A little before 0600 hours, more than half an hour before sunrise, JNA units commenced the mortar and other artillery barrage. At first, the principal target was Surge. As the two attacking units approached Surge, they came under defensive fire from Surge. In time, Croatian 82mm mortar and machine gun fire was commenced from the wider city of Dubrovnik, but not from the Old Town, against the attacking troops. As the JNA troops attacking Surge came under increasing fire, some JNA artillery fire was targeted at Croatian firing positions in the wider city of Dubrovnik in an attempt to neutralise them. By about 0800 hours, the JNA attacking forces had approached sufficiently close to Surge to be themselves threatened by the JNA artillery barrage on Surge. The barrage of Surge was called off so that the JNA troops could continue to advance. They were, however, still under mortar attack from Croatian positions in the wider city of Dubrovnik, as well as defensive fire from Surge. While there had been some shelling by the JNA of Dubrovnik, including the Old Town, virtually from the commencement of fire by JNA batteries, from the time of the cessation of the JNA artillery barrage on Surge at about 0800 hours, the full force of the active JNA mortars and other artillery, including Malutka rockets or missiles, appears to have been directed at Dubrovnik, including the Old Town. There was no adequate control and direction of the fire of the JNA mortars and other weapons. Fire was not confined to Croatian military targets. Instead, they fired extensively, deliberately and indiscriminately at Dubrovnik, including the Old Town. This continued for many hours, as has been indicated. The infantry attack on Surge was the scene of very intense and desperate close combat by both Croatian and JNA forces. There were fatalities and other casualties on both sides. The Croatian defenders withdrew into positions underground in the stone fortress on Surge and called in Croatian mortar and other fire on the attacking JNA forces surrounding the fortress. Attempts to overcome the Croatian defenders or to force them to capitulate were made over many hours, but without success. Eventually, after 1400 hours, the exhausted attacking JNA forces called off the attempt to capture Surge and withdrew with tank support under cover of another JNA mortar barrage on Surge. The withdrawal was completed by a little after 1500 hours. The attempt to capture Surge had failed. The JNA artillery attack on Dubrovnik, including the Old Town, had continued throughout the attempt to capture Surge. It was a position advanced by the defence at trial, as indeed it was an explanation of the JNA attack on Surge and the artillery attack on the Old Town, offered by the JNA in December 1991, that the attack was undertaken solely on the decision of Captain Kovacevic of the 3rd Battalion 472nd Brigade, a decision he made impulsively and contrary to superior orders early in the morning of 6 December 1991. The reason suggested for this remarkable conduct was that during the night of 5 and 6 December, Croatian forces at Serge had offered provocations by firing at his troops, killing one. He lost his self-control and ordered the attack in an emotional response to the conduct of the Croatian forces. It is the finding of the Chamber that this is entirely false. Late in the afternoon on 5 December 1991, a meeting was held in the forward command post of the 9 VPS at Kupari. The 3rd Battalion of the 472nd Brigade was then under the command of the 9 VPS, commanded by Admiral Jokic. Senior 9 VPS staff officers, including the Chief of Staff, Warship Captain Zech, the commander of the 3rd Battalion, Captain Kovacevic, and the commanders of other 9 VPS units were present at the meeting. At the meeting, a battle plan to take Serge the following morning and before 1200 hours was determined. Serge was the dominant feature and the one remaining position held by Croatian forces on the heights above Dubrovnik. The plan involved the use of mortars and other artillery against military targets, including those in the wider Dubrovnik, as required to support the assault on Serge. It involved 9 VPS units other than the 3rd Battalion 472nd Brigade. The evidence establishes in the Chamber's finding that the attack on Serge was entirely pre-planned and coordinated on 5 December 1991 by 9 VPS staff officers and was not initiated by Captain Kovacevic alone in the early morning of 6 December 1991 in response to provocations that night by the Croatian forces. On 6 December 1991, repeated protests against the JNA artillery attack on Dubrovnik, especially the Old Town, by Minister Rudolph leading the Croatian ministerial delegation, the European Community Monitoring Mission, ECMM, and the civil authorities of Dubrovnik were made variously to the 9 VPS, to the accused, and in Belgrade to the Federal Secretary of Defence, General Kudajevic. These were entirely ineffective to stop the artillery attack. In the Chamber's finding, however, a protest by the ECMM to General Kudajevic led him to telephone the accused between 0600 and 0700 hours. The accused in turn, at around 0700 hours, telephoned Admiral Jokic. These events and what passed between the accused and Admiral Jokic at the time and later in the day are the subject of much controversy in the evidence. It is unnecessary for present purposes to attempt to summarise all the Chamber's consideration of these matters, and its reasons for the conclusions it has reached. The Chamber would particularly note its finding, however, that at no time during the morning of 6 December 1991 did either the accused or Admiral Jokic order that the JNA attack to capture Serge should cease. There were discussions between Admiral Jokic and Minister Rudolph during the morning in which they agreed to a ceasefire to take effect at 11:15 hours. Following this, the accused did order a ceasefire. This order only went to some JNA units. In particular, there was no order given to the infantry units trying to capture Serge to cease their attack. As was inevitable, because the JNA attack on Serge continued and not all JNA artillery units ceased fire, the ceasefire was ineffective and both sides continued firing. No further steps were taken by either the accused or Admiral Jokic to stop the artillery attack on the Old Town or any other aspect of the JNA assault. Instead, the accused and Admiral Jokic flew together to Belgrade in the afternoon. General Kadajevic had ordered them to do so that morning when the ECMM protest reached him. The three met in the afternoon, the accused and Admiral Jokic returning to their commands at about 17:30 hours. It is apparent that the JNA was in what is colloquially described as damage control mode at that stage in respect of the attack on Dubrovnik, especially the Old Town. The attack had provoked virtually immediate and strong adverse international reaction. Admiral Jokic was in immediate command of all the JNA forces involved in the attack that day. He was also in communication with the Croatian and international representatives. He was assigned the task of trying to repair the damage and sort things out. He proposed an inquiry which was an obvious step in deflecting adverse international opinion. What followed in the finding of the Chamber evidences the tenor and the effect of the understanding or instructions Admiral Jokic took from the Belgrade meeting. The next morning he signed a ceasefire agreement. His immediate actions were to give unqualified assurances, citing the authority of General Kadajevic, of a thorough investigation and action to deal with the perpetrators, to Minister Rudolph, the Dubrovnik Crisis Committee and the ECMM. He quickly conducted what the Chamber has found was a sham inquiry. He reported briefly to the Federal Secretariat on the steps he took and generally on the action of 6 December 1991 in a way which was quite out of keeping with the facts as revealed by the evidence, so as to put the conduct of the JNA forces in a more favourable light. The next day, a commission of 3 9-VPS officers visited the Old Town to report on the damage. Admiral Jokic endorsed their report, which sought to minimise the nature and extent of the damage and deflect responsibility for its cause from the JNA. On the evening of 6 December 1991, he removed one acting battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Jovanovic of the 3rd Battalion, 5th Brigade, from his post. Strangely, Lieutenant Colonel Jovanovic had only held this acting post for 1 day. He was returned to his normal duties without any adverse disciplinary or other action. The 3rd Battalion, the 5th Brigade, had no responsibility for the shelling of the Old Town, as the Old Town was beyond the range of its mortars. Admiral Jokic took no other disciplinary or administrative action to better determine the truth of what had occurred or to deal with those responsible. The Chamber notes that no further investigative or disciplinary action was undertaken by his immediate superior, the accused, or in turn the accused superior, General Kadajevic. Numerous propositions were advanced as to why the Old Town came to be shelled on 6 December 1991. In particular, in the course of the defence case, the view was pursued that in truth there had been little or no damage to the Old Town. The Chamber, however, is satisfied by the evidence there was extensive damage and that it extended over substantial areas of the Old Town. One other position for which the defence contended is that any damage, alternatively some of the damage, to the Old Town was in fact deliberately or accidentally inflicted by the Croatian defending forces or other Croatian interests. However, there is a strong body of evidence, indeed an overwhelming body, that the damage inflicted in and to the Old Town of Dubrovnik on 6 December 1991 was caused by the JNA shelling. Yet a further defence submission, and one which is somewhat inconsistent with the submissions we have just been considering, is that any damage to the Old Town on 6 December 1991 was a regrettable but unavoidable consequence of artillery fire of the JNA targeted at Croatian military positions in and in the immediate vicinity of the Old Town. In part, the JNA forces did target Croatian firing and other military positions, actual or believed, in the wider Dubrovnik, but none of them were in the Old Town. Despite some contrary evidence, these Croatian positions were all too distant from the Old Town to put it in danger of unintended incidental fall of JNA shells targeted at those Croatian positions. It is the finding of the Chamber that the cause of the established damage to the Old Town was extensive, deliberate and indiscriminate shelling of the Old Town over some 10.5 hours on 6 December 1991, not only by JNA mortars, but also by other JNA weapons such as ZIS and recoilless cannons and Malutka rockets. Turning now to the specific charges. The indictment alleges the murder of 2 civilians in the course of the attack. In this respect, the Chamber observes that where a town occupied by a civilian population is subjected to a deliberate artillery attack which results in civilian deaths, these deaths may constitute murder when the perpetrators had knowledge of the probability that the attack would cause deaths. The Chamber is satisfied that the fact and the cause of death are established for both civilians. The actual JNA perpetrators deliberately targeted the old town knowing it had a civilian population. The elements of murder have been established against those perpetrators.